Hi, everybody. Today is Monday, July 28th, 2025, and our friend Paul Carradine is back with us. Welcome back, Paul.
Thank you, Nima.
Paul, I want to start with the communication between the United States, economic communication between the United States and Europe. Here is what Donald Trump said about the way that they're trying to sell energy and they're trying to sell weapons to Europe. Here is what he said.
750 billion, 600 billion, opening up the country. We are agreeing that the tariff straight across for automobiles and everything else will be a straight across tariff of 15%. So we have a tariff of 15%. We have the opening up of all of the European countries, which I think I could say were essentially closed. I mean, you weren't exactly taking our autos, you weren't exactly taking our agriculture, and then you would have smaller things, but for the most part, it was closed. And now it's open. It's open for our companies to go in and do a good job with it. I think you'll like them. I think you'll like it. And we will, very importantly, they'll be investing a lot of money, but the military is a big number, but that's one number we're not determining. It's going to be whatever it is, but they're going to be purchasing hundreds of billions of dollars worth of military equipment. They're very important. They're going to purchase $750 billion worth of energy. So that's going to be great. And $600 billion worth of investments into the United States over and above what they have. So, and I think that basically concludes the deal. I mean, those are the...
Yeah. Paul, looking at the way that Donald Trump is trying to deal or somehow communicate with Europeans, do you understand that what is the end game for Europeans to be that much, there's somehow it seems to me that they're trying to do anything and everything in order to satisfy Donald Trump and his administration in order to continue with the concept of the continuation of the war in Ukraine. Your take on that?
Well, my take on it is that Trump sees the presidency the way a businessman sees the corporation he's running.
Yeah.
And Trump, I think, has been unhappy for many years that so many of the costs of European defense were borne by the American taxpayer. And I think he was unhappy that all of the weapons being sent to Ukraine to fight this proxy war against Russia were being financed by the U.S. taxpayer. It was the taxpayer paying the American military security complex for the weapons that were going to Ukraine. And so Trump decided to shift those costs to NATO, or to the EU, which they seem to be getting increasingly commingled, and to eliminate the American toleration of unequal tariff and trade barriers. So from that standpoint, the way he sees it, he's been successful. He's done a good job. For the Europeans, it serves the purpose of tying them deeper to the United States. So they're not running the risk of somehow eventually being cut off and left there all alone. And so for them, that has a value. And it also seems to reconcile all the antagonisms that were coming from the Trump administration toward Europe. Now, many of these antagonisms might continue. For example, the Europeans are increasingly cutting down on free speech. And this is especially the case in Scandinavia, the UK, and Germany. And so they're becoming sort of totalitarian, or they're getting outside the boundaries of what democracies are thought to be by the way they prevent their ethnic citizens from criticizing the behavior of immigrant invaders and criticizing the numbers that keep flooding in. So that may remain a sore point. We know that J.T. Vance in Europe a while back bawled them out about these types of behaviors. But of course, the United States does the same thing against critics of Israel. So we can't criticize Israel, and the Europeans can't criticize the immigrant invaders. But so I don't know. I guess on the whole, this comes to a peaceful solution. The Europeans accepted the destruction of the North Sea gas pipeline. They accepted the Trump sanctions, so they did themselves out of the less expensive Russian energy, and now they're stuck with ours, which is more expensive. But still, it's a source of energy, and that is always important to Europe, because they're not exactly, other than the North Sea fields, which I think are not very extensive, they don't really have independent sources of energy. So I would say, Nemo, it's not a bad thing all around, but we'll see. I mean, you're right. All kinds of antagonisms could come out of these deals. But for now, it seems to settle things.
Yeah. It seems that Donald Trump is continuing with the concept of 50 days deadline that he put for Russia. How is that gonna? Do you feel that he's gonna do something out after 50 days? Here's what he said today about the deadline he put.
Said that you were going to change the deadline from 50 days. So
Yeah.
what is your new deadline? What can
I'm
we
going to
expect?
make a new deadline of about 10 or 12 days from today. There's no reason in waiting. There's no reason in waiting. It's 50 days. I want to be generous, but we just don't see any progress being made.
Mr. President, on guard.
Yeah, he doesn't see any sort of progress being made, but what kind of progress does he want? We know that Russia is advancing on the battlefield and Ukrainians are losing, and Europeans want to buy weapons for Ukrainians. Nobody knows they're going to pay it, and nobody knows when they're going to get the weapons. And what does he want from the battlefield or from Russia?
No one knows, including Putin. And maybe Trump doesn't know. I think we've made this point before, Nima, that this is an American war with Russia. Ukraine is the proxy. Zelensky is the person that the Americans stuck in there and have supported to carry on this proxy war against Russia. So Zelensky can't settle it. And of course, Putin has said over and over he's not interested in negotiating the end of the war. He wants a mutual security agreement that ends the root cause of the war. He said, if we have a mutual security agreement, the war is over and done with. So it's a form of Trump evading the issue. It's actually Trump's responsibility to meet with Putin, to understand what Putin is telling him. Look, we're not trying to negotiate conditions for ending the war. We're trying to get rid of what has caused the war, and that is our feelings of insecurity caused by American policy. And can you change that policy? This is the question. Trump hasn't come to grips with it. So how do we explain that? For me, who've been high enough in the government to know what goes on, I'm startled that Trump's foreign policy team and the professionals in the bureaucracy haven't conveyed to Trump what it is that Putin says, and tell him that, look, Mr. President, this is your job. You have to figure out if you're willing to have a mutual security agreement. And if you're not willing, it means a continuation of hostilities, not just in Ukraine, but they're going to continue because the Russians feel insecure. The Americans with missile bases are on their borders. There's an operating base in Poland, there's one in Romania. You might remember we got all upset when Khrushchev was putting missiles in Cuba. Well, we've got missiles right on their border. They're upset. And these are the kind of things that Putin is demanding attention be given to, not where the battle lines will be finalized and all of that. So it looks to me like Trump either has no concept or he's not realistic about wanting to negotiate a settlement. Once again, it's not a settlement of a conflict, a war in Ukraine. It's a settlement of the tensions that have been created since 1991 by the Wolfowitz doctrine of American hegemony with Russia. So that's unaddressed. As long as that's unaddressed, then all of Trump going on about how many days they have to do what doesn't mean anything. So I don't know how it's going to end up, Nima. Plus, I don't know what Trump can do. He implied, and I think the German defense minister or general or somebody over there implied that the next missiles sent to Ukraine would be used to attack Moscow. Well, that's going to unleash hell. That's not a good idea. And which brings me back to my longtime point. This is all Putin's fault. If Putin had won that war real quick, none of this would have ever developed. This is all the result of a small conflict widening and widening and widening until it's on the brink of a major catastrophic war. So I blame Putin. I have no idea why he fought a war in a way guaranteed to deeply involve the West. And it looks like they're so deep they can't get out. And of course, it should have been obvious to Putin from the beginning that once the American military security complex is involved in the war, making all this money from all the weapons that we send them that the Russians blow up, you're not going to get them out of the war. It's profits to them. And so it's just a total failure of Russian strategic thinking. I don't know what the outcome will be. And particularly, as we have said, Trump's not paying any attention to what Putin says. So if one side of the debate isn't paying attention to what the other side is saying, there's not going to be any solution.
What's funny and somehow dangerous about the concept, the attitude of Europe, Paul, is that since Donald Trump was elected, he said that his purpose, his main objective is to make America great again. In that motto, there is no Europe. He said that we want to pivot from Europe to Asia to Pacific, and the main goal is to reach some sort of agreement. I don't know, economic agreement with China, a win-win for both parties. But you don't see Europe being part of that grand strategy. And on the other hand, when it comes to the Europeans, it seems that as much as the United States shows the unwillingness to participate in what's going on in Ukraine, they're just trying to drag the United States in even more than before. Somehow it's some sort of, you cannot understand what do they want. They want to be, if they were, in my opinion, they were sane and they knew what's going on with their economy, they would want to be more independent from the United States, more independent from other superpowers. Europe can be a powerhouse if they decide to go in that direction. But instead they have decided, you look at the holdings of the US Treasury, the UK holdings of US Treasury, it's just going up. Look at the graph Financial Times reported. It shows how they're buying the US Treasury, and they're getting more independent. They're not producing anything in Europe. They're just getting more independent. Germany is getting more independent,
You
more
mean
dependent on the
you
United
mean
States.
dependent? Yeah,
Yeah,
dependent.
more dependent on the United States, Germany, the United Kingdom, you name it, France. And you, if you were Europe and you see what's going on in Ukraine, they're losing. And so what's the main goal? Providing Ukrainians with weapons when there is no manpower to work with those weapons, to use those weapons. What is going on in Europe, in your opinion? Why there's, do you think they couldn't, they cannot decide about their destiny, their fate, their future? That's why they're trying to be more dependent on the United States.
Well, the European countries gave up the notion of sovereignty decades ago. They associate national sovereignty with Nazi Germany. And they see ethnic-based national sovereignty as a threat, a danger. And so it was easy then for the CIA to herd them into the European Union because that implies a surrender of sovereignty. The surrender is far from complete, but now the EU has some controls over the member states. So their sovereignty is already compromised. And these controls are supposed to grow and grow until there's only the EU government, so that Europe becomes like the United States. There's a government in Washington. So the EU government will be the central government, and the countries will be like states, part of a country called EU. So that there may be some differences in the laws of the states, but they all have to conform with the EU. So since the EU is an authoritative political arrangement, it's not an elected democracy, and the elected members of the parliament are essentially powerless, then EU becomes an authoritarian state. It's not any longer any relation to Western democracy. So they're not, their notion of independence died. De Gaulle's France, this was the last of European independence. He refused to join NATO. He refused to incorporate with the American financial policy. He was demanding gold in exchange for the dollars he was holding in the form of treasury bonds in the French central bank. So that's all gone. So the United States is kind of like an anchor for Europe. The Europeans have been American puppets really since the end of World War II. They were dependent on aid. They accepted the dollar as world reserve currency. They're incorporated. What happened with World War II is the United States replaced Great Britain. Before the war, the British pound was the world reserve currency. The British trade agreements organized and controlled international trade. President Roosevelt in Washington was determined to have all those powers shifted to the U.S. And that was Roosevelt's achievement. That's what the war meant to President Roosevelt. He wasn't campaigning against the Germans. He was campaigning against the British, whose power he wanted. Historians try to cover that up, but that's exactly what was going on. So the Europeans have been drained of power for the longest time, and they're accustomed to taking guidance from Washington because they get in all kinds of problems. They don't know who's going to bail them out. Who's going to, if something goes wrong, who's got the resources? And as far as being any kind of unity in Europe, there's not. Just don't you remember it was just a few years ago how the Greeks and the Portuguese were brutally exploited by the European Central Bank, by the German and Dutch banks. They forced those countries into impoverishing themselves. They had to sell off state assets, national assets. They had to cut social spending, educational spending to pay interest to German and Dutch banks. Well, if the way you make money is looting your own members, this had to, I think the East Europeans learned from that. Like this Orban in Hungary, he's very much aware of what the EU really is. And it may well be the Poles are. So I think that for Europe, it just hasn't got an alternative. It's not like it can say, well, we're going to be independent now. Good luck. Your mic's gone.
Yeah, isn't that so strange when you look at the United Kingdom? They're not part of the European Union, but they're driving everything behind the scene in terms of the war in Ukraine, in terms of I would say the policy, even the policy in the Middle East. What is the role of the United Kingdom? What do they have? What is the leverage that do they have on these European countries that even considering not being part of the European Union, still running the show?
Well, they were part, and they left because people thought if they got out, it would cease the massive immigration, because the EU was forcing them to take these immigrants, and so they said, "Well, we're going to leave." I think that the answer is that traditionally, Britain was the arbiter of Europe. Britain was where France would turn for security against Germany. If somebody wanted to start a war, they had to get Britain's approval and involvement. And I think it's just kind of a way they think and operate. It's institutionalized. It's historical thing of Britain. And of course, the British economy is larger than the French. And it used to be, preeminent before they were wrecked by the wars. So I think that's a part of it. But they've been controlled by Washington ever since Roosevelt, because he had his thumb on Churchill. And so they're seen as like they're speaking for the Americans. And so they speak for us and we speak for us. So it's two voices. And so the rest just sort of say, what can we do? It's not Greece and Portugal speaking. So I think that's the explanation. But the real puzzle, Nima, is why does anyone see any gain other than American military profits from these tensions with Russia? It's not like the Germans or the British have a massive defense industry that's going to clean up selling these weapons. They got to buy American ones. So what do they get out of it? And I suppose all they get out of it is peace with Trump. And I guess they value that.
Paul, considering the behavior of the United Kingdom is somehow you can get confused by their behavior, because you look at what has happened recently with the nuclear bombers in Russia. Do you really believe that it was the Trump administration behind the scene doing this? I don't see that. I think that it was all about the United Kingdom and their intelligence. They were behind what has happened to Russia. They somehow look at what's going on in Ukraine. They're talking about replacing Zelensky. All of a sudden, you see your Ukrainians coming out, protesting against corruption, all of that. And who's going to be the next president of Ukraine? They have prepared Zelensky to be the next president. Where is Zelensky? Is in the United Kingdom. It seems that even we didn't know about it before Donald Trump being elected in the United States, because somehow there was some sort of coordination between the United States and the United Kingdom. But since Donald Trump coming to Washington, we see that the British government and the British intelligence are much bolder. Their role is much bolder than the one from the United States, the one of the United States. How do you understand this sort of, you said that it's all about the military industrial complex of the United States, but we know even with that deal of rare earth or mineral deal with the United States, between the United States and Ukraine, the British government signed an agreement 100 years for 100 years to come about a mineral and natural resources that they have in Ukraine. They're, I would say they're one or two steps again ahead of the United States in anything happening in Ukraine. What is that in your opinion? Is that, as you mentioned, is that the United States, or you believe that it's the British government, British intelligence, the British benefit is in Ukraine?
Well, I think it's Britain operating as an agent for Washington. Trump Trump doesn't want responsibility if he's trying to deal with Putin. How's he going to deal with Putin if Putin says, look at all these things you're doing to us? But he doesn't want the pressure off of what he thinks is pressure on Russia. He doesn't want it off. So Washington's turned it over to the British secret services. So they certainly didn't do that without Washington knowing. That would get them. Oh boy, that would really get them in trouble. Washington won't permit a puppet to take the lead from it. It's not. I mean, Britain would have been crushed in some way. They would turn George Soros loose on the British pound again. So I think that you're right. This was the attack on the Russian strategic bombers, which involved trucks full of drones driving into Russia and launching the missiles inside the protective radar boundaries. Um, this shows a failure of Russian intelligence. But I think it was just the British. They're acting as our agent. They're keeping the pressure on, but it's not being blamed on Trump. He can step back and negotiate in good faith with Putin. But of course, there's been no negotiation. So it just looks to me like a way to keep the conflict going, to please the military security complex. The American taxpayer is going to stop paying for the weapons. The Europeans are going to pay for them, but the weapons are going to continue to flow. So in that way, Trump can tell American people that, hey, I've stopped the war expense for you. And making America great again. Now, this was a propaganda slogan to appeal to American patriotism, because many Americans felt like they were being forced to take a back seat, not only to millions of immigrant invaders, but to foreign interests, because we were paying all the bills. And so what Trump has done is to score a big success on this point with the MAGA Americans. So we're out of the war. It's all Putin's fault. I tried to do something and he just won't listen. And I'm out of it. The Europeans are doing it. Our guys are still making money selling weapons, but you're not paying for them. And the British and the Germans and the French are. And so I think that's the explanation. Nima, I can't see any way that the British can operate independently of Washington in something like that. That's a serious matter to attack the Russian triad. We've talked about it before. It really calls for a strategic response that Putin sidestepped by saying it wasn't an act of war, it's an act of terrorism, so I don't have to do anything. Well, nobody really knew in advance he was going to make that decision. So it was highly risky, and I just can't see British intelligence taking that risk without it being cleared with Washington. It just doesn't make sense to me. I think there would have been a terrible consequence for the British.
Paul, with the case of Gaza, with the case of the Middle East, we had Steve Witkoff talking with Hamas. I don't know if he was directly talking with them or through Qataris he was talking with them, but he couldn't make an agreement. What does Donald Trump want? He said that the time is up and they don't have any more because he feels that he's just spending time and he's not getting anything from these talks, these negotiations with Hamas. What does he want from Hamas? He wants some sort of capitulation. He wants to force his terms on Hamas, or sending just just asking them to send their hostages back. And And I don't know what would happen in the aftermath of that sort of attitude on the part of Hamas. What does he want, in your opinion, that he couldn't achieve it so far?
Well, let's approach this by asking, what can Hamas do? What can it do? If it surrenders, they'll all be killed. It can't make a deal with Israel because Israel has already declared all of Gaza is Israel's. All of Gaza is not just all of Gaza, all of Palestine, they said. All of Palestine is Israel. So there's no conception in the Israeli government of there being a Palestine. So what can Hamas agree to? Can it agree that there's not a Palestine? I mean, for all practical reasons, it's not. The Gaza is destroyed. I don't know if there's a building standing. And the remnants of the West Bank, the Israeli parliament just declared or passed something that this was now part of Israel. So Hamas can't do anything. What can they do? The only thing they could agree to is there won't be a Palestine. There's no other agreement acceptable to Israel. If Palestine, I mean, if Hamas gives the remaining hostages back, then Israel will quickly resume all the bombing and killing and everything else. You know, we already see the Israelis are totally insensitive to people starving to death. They block any efforts for aid to reach these people. So I don't see any possibility for Hamas to do anything. They may as well fight. They're going to be killed anyhow. If Hamas surrenders, they'll all be executed. They're terrorists. They did all these awful things. And the charges against them will mount and be blown out of all possibilities of ever having happened. And so that's the problem. And it comes back to Trump. Trump could stop it, but he doesn't. He keeps sending the money. He keeps sending the weapons. He keeps sending the diplomatic cover. The other day, he said Israel should just go ahead and finish the job. So Hamas has no basis whatsoever of thinking there's any sincerity on the part of the United States in finding some kind of solution. So the whole thing just strikes me as a form of unreality that increasingly characterizes everything in the world. You may have seen that just the other day. The spokesman for the Kremlin, he said the only solution is a two-state solution. Well,
You mean Peskov?
yeah, Pascal. Yeah, how can there be a two-state solution when there's no Palestine? And the Israelis have already said there's no Palestine, there's only Israel. So, and nobody is prepared to do anything to Israel that would punish them for starving these people to death. Now they've blown up their homes, they've blown up their hospitals, their schools, their food chain, their water, the infrastructure, and now they're starving them to death. And nobody does anything. So what can Hamas think is any support for any agreement they make? They know this is pointless. These agreements, they're pointless. They mean nothing. And all they can do is agree to go away. And of course, they won't be allowed to go away. They may be told they can go away, but they'll be shot as they go out the door. And Hamas knows that. So again, I think we see the failure both of the Kremlin and Washington. How could any Russian official at this late stage think that the solution is a two-state solution, a Palestinian state alongside Israel? That's what Peskov said. They've been saying this since 1947. The two-state solution is always the response of the West. And over the years, the result has been Palestine shrinks and shrinks and shrinks and shrinks and shrinks, and it's nothing now. So, if Trump and Putin called up Netanyahu, said, that's it, no more, that would be over. It'd be over with. But they won't do that. Neither one of them will do it. Oh, that would be anti-Semitic. You stop them from shooting babies in the head, that's anti-Semitic. And so we've got the two most powerful countries that are total cowards when it comes to Israel, and which tells me there's a problem with the leaders.
Paul, here is what Lindsey Graham on Fox News said about Israel and Gaza.
Said he told Prime Minister Netanyahu to, quote, finish the job this week. I know that you are in touch with President Trump. You're in touch with Israeli officials. What are you anticipating is going to happen next? What does finish the job mean, Senator?
Well, I talked to Cindy McCain last night. Here's some good news for the people in Gaza. Humanitarian quarters are now going to be open. Israel's going to work with the UN, the World Food Program, to get some food into these people who need it. But I think what the topic we're talking about today is a change in strategy. I think President Trump has come to believe, and I certainly have come to believe, there's no way you're going to negotiate an end to this war with Hamas. Hamas is a terrorist organization who is chartered to destroy the state of Israel. They're religious Nazis. They hold Israeli hostages. I think Israel's come to conclude that they can't achieve a goal of ending the war with Hamas that would be satisfactory to the safety of Israel. And if they're going to do in Gaza what we did in Tokyo and Berlin, take the place by force, then start over again, presenting a better future for the Palestinians, hopefully having the Arabs take over the West Bank and Gaza. But I think going forward, Christian, you're going to see a change in tactics, a full military effort by Israel to take Gaza down like we did in Tokyo and Berlin.
Senator
Paul, what does he mean in Tokyo and Berlin? Because so far Israel did everything. They tried everything in Gaza. They destroyed everything. What else can they do?
Well, they can starve the population to death and have them all die of disease. They can, there's no medicine. I just read a report on how badly malnourished the entire population was. So the whole population is sitting there waiting to pop off. It'd only take a mild virus, everybody would be dead. So I think he means to finish the genocide, to exterminate them, is what he means. And, he's totally indoctrinated. And notice that Hamas is evil because it's holding a few Israeli hostages. Well, Israel's been holding Palestine hostage for how long? Decades. I mean, Gaza is a concentration camp. They can't get in or out. So when you have a person as unbalanced as that senator, I mean, I despise him. I really do. I despise him. I'm ashamed that he's an American. He's despicable and a liar. When you have people like that making decisions, we've already said, what can Hamas do? It can surrender. That's all it can do. It has this. If Israel says all Palestine is Israel, then Hamas it has nothing to negotiate for. And in fact, when the Israelis say that, that's what they're telling Hamas. There's nothing you can negotiate about with us. And, you know, the senator, oh, it's pathetic that Americans are so utterly insouciant that they put a man like that in the Senate. It's just, it makes me ashamed.
Do you feel that if France finally, they were talking about recognizing the Palestinian state, Canada was talking about it, and do you feel that that could somehow put pressure on Israel?
No, no, what can Canada do? Nothing. France, they'll just be accused of being anti-Semitic. And no, I think that nothing can be done, and the Israelis are going to exterminate what remains of the Palestinians. And you know, the Palestinians have been putting up with this for decades and decades and decades. You know, the Israelis would come in and clean out a village. And then everybody'd raise hell, and the Israelis would stop for a while, and they'd come and clean out another village, and everybody'd raise hell, and they'd stop for a while. And the Palestinians never got organized. The Palestinians outnumbered the Jews, but they didn't ever get any guns. They never said, hey, we got to defend ourselves, our lives, our property. And so I think we ended up the more Palestinians living in refugee camps in Jordan and not Yemen, but Lebanon than were in Palestine. And I think it's true. I think that I read you had refugee camps that had 3 generations of Palestinians born in the refugee camps. So Israel has been displacing the population out of the country ever since 1947. And the Palestinians never said, hey, we got to fight for our lives. So they just stand there, and this village would go, and they'd stand, then that village would go. And this has been going on weekly. The so-called settlers, they go into West Bank areas that are nominally Palestinian, and they knock down the houses, they plow up the olive trees, they run the people off, and they build apartments for settlers. And the Israeli government does nothing about it. The world community does nothing about it. So they've continued step by step dispossession of the Palestinians. It's getting close to a century. So I think there's nothing the Palestinians can do at this point, and the only people that seem willing to fight for them are the Houthis. It's not a very large group of people. They seem to be fierce, like Afghans, but they're not equipped with the capability of stopping what's going on in Gaza. And clearly the Western world's not going to stop it. So I don't think it matters what France or Canada says. They've no influence. They can't do anything. What's France going to do? Send the French army to Israel? I mean, the United States would never allow that. So I would say that the Palestinians are done for, and that's what Trump and Lindsey Graham have signaled. Go finish the job. Finish the job. Or what is finish the job? Killing the rest of them. I mean, we don't really know how many of these people have already been killed. I mean, it must be hundreds of thousands. And if they're all malnourished and there's no water, there's no medicine, there's no hospital, there's no food, they get shot in the head standing in aid lines, they're finished. It's a terrible thing. And the whole world has stood there and allowed this. And the whole world could have stopped it. But it didn't. And so there you have it, you know. It turns out that the UN is even less effective than the League of Nations. You may remember when Italy invaded Abyssinia, which we know is Ethiopia. And the Western world did nothing about it. The British did nothing. Nobody did anything. And the League of Nations fell apart. And the balances in Europe changed and helped lead to the Second World War. So I think, you know, the UN it's deader than the League of Nations. So
Yeah.
there's, if you think about where, you know, the BRICS they're an effort of countries to get some independence. And they see it as an umbrella with powerful countries, Russia, China, India, in this, and large countries that could become powerful, like Brazil. And so they say, okay, that's an accumulation of power that can't have their sovereignty stolen. And so that's why BRICS is attractive, because the British intelligence can't come in and overthrow them, or the CIA can't come in and kill their leader and stick in a puppet, or it's more difficult for that because they're in this group that allegedly stand for one another. So it may well be that the outcome of all this awful stuff will be the formation of a powerful, independent part of the world, and it may mean the decay of what remains of the Western world, which isn't much. You know, right now, as we're having this interview, there are riots all over England against the immigrant invaders. They come in, they're housed in hotels at taxpayer expense. They're fed, they're protected by the police, and when they commit gang rapes, it doesn't even get investigated. So they not only have all kinds of economic rights that they've taken from the British people, they also have legal privileges to commit crimes that the ethnic British can't commit. We just had Liz Truss, the recent prime minister, say we can't even investigate the gang rapes. We can't even investigate them, much less punish anybody. Well, the British finally woke up, hey, this ain't our country anymore. And so we see the white police arrayed against the white indigenous English. Well, the public will have no confidence in the police, no confidence in the government, And so where's your country? So I think this is a situation in Scandinavia, and I think it's close to the situation in Germany. You know, they've been having a lot of political turmoil in Germany, which you wouldn't expect. But it's because German citizens get second-class treatment to the immigrant invaders. So Europe and the United States, the universities here, have been working for decades to destroy the structure of beliefs that hold the country together. So if you lose your structure of beliefs, you've lost your country. So when you look at these weaknesses, you really can see a big transformation in the world in the future. You're going.
Yeah, here is just to wrap up this session. Here is what Steve Witkoff said about the agenda on the part of the Trump administration.
Ukraine and we get that peace deal, because it should happen. It's the war that the president is right, that should have never happened. I think we get that solved. Hopefully that'll be a big moment. I think if we expand the Abraham Peace Accords, if we get a peace, a lasting peace in Gaza, if we figure out long-term peace in the Middle East, if we normalize with the state of Israel, I think that will be a crowning achievement. And then I think your father-in-law ought to get what he deserved the last time around. He ought to get the Nobel Peace Prize, but not just for one effort, for all of the effort. That's how important and relevant it is.
Who's anymore believing that Steve
don't know.
Witkoff is?
I
Because
don't know what I can't imagine. Did he recently say that or say that several years ago?
no, it's just recently, the latest
Well,
interview.
it's not. It's total nonsense, Nima. You know that. I know that. It's total nonsense. What are you talking about? Peace. Peace. They've done nothing to get peace. They talk about it and they issue ultimatums, but they've negotiated with nobody. Trump has never told Netanyahu, hey, stop massacring these people. You're making my life uncomfortable, and I'm not going to pay for it anymore. He's never said that. He's never sat down with Putin. He's never sat down with the Iranian leadership. So how are they going to get any agreement? How are they going to resolve anything? They got no interest whatsoever in resolving these instances of barbarity. They've no interest. They've done nothing. They sit there and talk like that guy. I mean, it's disgusting. It's shameful. It's, if Americans understood, they'd be so ashamed of their government, they'd walk away from it. But they're just, they're lost in their patriotism and all this stuff. And they're blind. And, we talked about it before. In 1973, Jean Raspail wrote The Camp of the Saints. It's a story of the complete degeneration and collapse of Europe. That's what we're witnessing now. We're living it. It's happening in front of our eyes. The Prime Minister of England says, I was powerless. The men in black removed me from office. We are powerless. We can't even investigate the gang rapes of our 10-year-old daughters. Well, how is that a country? It's a conquered land. So, Nima, I don't think there's any basis for any optimism, except what we talked about down the road. If BRICS can hold together and prevent erosion, but look, I know we're over our usual line, but there is one important thing that I called attention to the other day. Azerbaijan and Armenia have given the Americans the right to use that part of the China road and whatever it is.
is Zangezur corridor between Azerbaijan and Armenia.
Yeah, yeah. So here we are right there, screwing up the new Chinese Silk Road project. We are there. Well, how did the Chinese let that happen? Were they all drinking tea? What it's, it's, how did the Russians let that happen? I mean, what would Stalin have done? He'd have called up those two countries and said, "Hey, buddy, you're not going to be there in 10 minutes. You better get out of that agreement." That's what they would have said. Nothing could have ever happened like this under Stalin or Mao. They could see what it means. Well, apparently the Chinese government is blind as the Russian government. They've now given away the new Silk Road. I mean, I think, Nima, this is why the Americans are so confident and so arrogant. They just don't think the opponents have enough sense to protect themselves. I really think that. And I think that's what they've concluded from watching the Chinese and the Russian government. That these people are dumber than anything. They won't protect themselves. We can do whatever we want. They ain't gonna do anything. So I think that's a situation. And if the rest of the people in BRICS start seeing it that way, they're not going to feel secure because the two monster countries aren't really monsters.
Thank you so much, Paul, for being with us today. Great pleasure as always.
Thank you, Nima. I always enjoy this. Your questions make me think about things that I haven't thought about.
Yeah, it was amazing.
All right.
See you soon,
Till
Paul.
later.
See you later. Bye.